The bottle gleams under the streetlight. Officer Wendell Briggs unscrews the cap, slowly grinning as the chemical smell fills the air. 72-year-old Dorothy Jenkins tries to step back, but his partner blocks her path. The acid sloshes near the rim. Dorothy's hands shake violently. She thinks of her grandson's face, knowing she'll never see his graduation now. Wendell tilts the bottle toward her weathered brown skin. That's when the voice cuts through the darkness, deep, calm, absolutely certain. A voice that stops everything. Dorothy doesn't know it yet, but this stranger will change her entire world. 15 minutes earlier, Dorothy had been driving her 1998 Toyota Camry home from her night shift, cleaning the Clarksville Community Hospital, her body aching after 9 straight hours of mopping floors and scrubbing toilets. The work was hard, exhausting really, but she never complained because it put food on the table and helped pay for her grandson Marcus's college fund. Marcus had just gotten accepted to Morehouse College, the first person in their entire family to attend university, and Dorothy felt so proud she could burst every time she thought about it. She hummed quietly along to the gospel station on her radio, thinking about how she'd surprise Marcus with new notebooks and pens for his first semester, how his face would light up with that beautiful smile that reminded her so much of her late husband, Robert. The empty stretch of Highway 49 was dark at this hour, nearly midnight, with nothing but abandoned cotton warehouses and overgrown fields on either side. Dorothy had driven this route for 23 years, knew every curve and pothole, felt safe in the familiar rhythm of the journey home. That's why the sudden flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror startled her so much. Her heart jumped in her chest as she checked her speedometer, but she was only going 42 miles per hour in a 55 zone, well within the legal limit. Confused and a little frightened, she signaled carefully and pulled over near one of the old warehouses, the building's broken windows staring down at her like empty eye sockets. 2 white officers emerged from the patrol car behind her, their silhouettes backlit by the flashing lights. The bigger one, with the crew cut and muscular build, approached her driver's side window with heavy, deliberate steps. His partner, thinner and radiating nervous energy, circled around to the passenger side. Dorothy rolled down her window, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel, exactly like her son had taught her years ago, back when he was still alive and worried about his mama driving home alone at Merit. The muscular officer leaned down, and Dorothy could see his name tag read Briggs. Officer Wendell Briggs stared at her with cold blue eyes that held no warmth, no professional courtesy, nothing but contempt. He demanded her license and registration in a tone that made it clear he wasn't asking, he was commanding. Dorothy said, "Yes, sir, of course, officer," and reached slowly for her purse, narrating her movement so there'd be no misunderstanding. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her wallet and fumbled through the glove compartment for her registration. She handed the documents through the window, addressing Officer Briggs with all the respect her mama had taught her to show authority figures, even when they didn't deserve it. Briggs examined her license under his flashlight, taking far longer than necessary, making her wait in uncomfortable silence while his partner, Kyle, watched from the other side of her car. Finally, Briggs looked up and claimed her taillight was broken, which Dorothy knew was impossible because she just had the car inspected 2 weeks ago and everything passed perfectly. Before she could protest politely, he ordered her out of the vehicle in a voice dripping with unnecessary aggression. Dorothy unbuckled her seatbelt and opened her door, moving slowly because her arthritis was particularly bad tonight and her knees didn't bend as easily as they used to. She apologized for the imaginary taillight violation, saying she'd get it fixed first thing in the morning, hoping compliance would end this encounter quickly. But Briggs just smiled, a disturbing expression that never reached his eyes, and gestured for his partner to search her car. Kyle Hutchkins opened her passenger door without asking permission and began rifling through her belongings, tossing her hospital work bag onto the seat, checking under the floor mats, even opening her glove compartment and scattering registration papers and old napkins. Dorothy stood beside her car, hugging herself against the night chill, watching this violation of her property with growing unease. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. Dorothy had never broken a law in her life, never even gotten a parking ticket. When the search came up empty, Briggs stepped closer to her, invading her personal space, and claimed he smelled marijuana. Dorothy's eyes widened in shock, and she shook her head, telling him that wasn't possible. She'd never touched drugs, never smoked anything. She was a devout member of First Baptist Church and taught Sunday school to kindergartners. Briggs laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the warehouse walls, and called her Grandma in a sneering, mocking voice that made her skin crawl. He told her she was going to learn what happened to people like her who didn't show proper respect to law enforcement. The words hit Dorothy like a physical blow as she realized with creeping horror that this wasn't a legitimate traffic stop at all. This was something else, something dangerous, something that could end very badly for a 72-year-old black woman alone on a dark highway with two white officers who clearly had bad intentions. Kyle pulled out his cell phone and started recording, both officers laughing now, like they were sharing a private joke at her expense. Dorothy's mouth went dry. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might give out right there. Wendell turned and walked back to his patrol car, popping the trunk with casual ease. Dorothy watched, paralyzed by fear, as he reached inside and pulled out a clear plastic bottle filled with liquid. Even from 10 feet away, when he unscrewed the cap, the chemical smell hit her nose and made her eyes water. The sharp, acrid odor of industrial acid. Dorothy's blood turned to ice in her veins. Wendell Briggs walked back toward Dorothy with the acid bottle held casually in one hand, like he was carrying a bottle of water instead of something that could destroy human flesh in seconds. He waved it in front of her face, so close she could feel the fumes burning her nostrils, and began describing in graphic, sadistic detail exactly what would happen to her skin when the acid made contact. He told her about a woman down in Georgia whose face had melted off after her boyfriend threw acid on her, how the doctors couldn't fix her, how she looked like something out of a horror movie, now how little kids screamed when they saw her in public. He asked Dorothy if she wanted to look like that, if she wanted her grandson to see her with no face, just raw meat and scar tissue. His voice was almost cheerful, like he was enjoying this, like her terror was entertaining to him. Kyle kept the camera pointed at her, making jokes about posting the video online, saying it would go viral, millions of views, maybe they'd become famous. Dorothy begged them to stop, her voice breaking as she asked what she'd done wrong, why they were doing this to her. She searched their faces for any sign of humanity, any indication that this was just meant to scare her and they'd let her go. But all she saw was cold enjoyment of her suffering. Wendell circled around her like a predator stalking prey, telling her she knew exactly what she'd done wrong, that she shouldn't play stupid with him. Dorothy genuinely had no idea what he was talking about. She'd never even gotten a speeding ticket, never had any interaction with police beyond friendly waves at community events. She told him so, desperation making her voice high and thin. That's when Wendell stopped circling and stood directly in front of her, so close she could smell coffee on his breath. He said her grandson's name, Marcus Jenkins. Dorothy's confusion transformed instantly into pure terror. How did this officer know Marcus? What did her baby grandson have to do with any of this? Wendell saw her fear in her eyes and smiled wider. He told her that Marcus had been posting videos on social media exposing racist police practices right here in Clarksville. One particular video showed Wendell and Kyle harassing a group of black teenagers outside Clarksville High School, calling them thugs, searching them without cause, threatening them with arrest for standing on a public sidewalk. That video had gotten over 50,000 views in 2 days. People from all over Mississippi and beyond were commenting, demanding the officers be fired, calling for investigation, saying the Clarksville Police Department was corrupt. Civil rights organizations had shared the video. Local news stations had picked it up. The mayor's office was getting calls. Wendell's own mother had seen it and called him crying, asking if it was true, if her son was really like that. Dorothy had no knowledge of Marcus's activism because she didn't use social media, didn't even own a smartphone, just her old flip phone for emergencies. Marcus had never mentioned the videos to her, probably knowing she'd worry, probably trying to protect her. But Wendell didn't believe her ignorance. He said she'd raised that troublemaking boy, filled his head with ideas about fighting the system, taught him to disrespect authority. Therefore, she was responsible for the damage to Wendell's reputation. Kyle chimed in, saying they couldn't touch Marcus directly because the kid was smart, always surrounded by friends with cameras ready to record, always in public places where an arrest would be witnessed and documented. But they could get to Marcus through her. They could send him a message about the consequences of making police officers look bad. They could show. His eyes, Dorothy noticed, even through her fear, were calm but absolutely focused, taking in every detail of the scene with what looked like tactical assessment. Kyle recognized something dangerous in the man's bearing and whispered urgently to Wendell that maybe they should just leave. Let the old lady go. Forget the whole thing. But Wendell's pride was engaged now. He couldn't back down in front of a witness, especially not a black man who was clearly challenging his authority. Wendell raised his voice, telling the stranger this was official police business and he needed to leave the area right now or face obstruction charges. The stranger stopped about 10 feet away, keeping his hands relaxed at his sides in a non-threatening but ready position. He asked in that same calm, authoritative voice what crime Dorothy had committed to warrant this treatment. Wendell, thinking quickly, claimed she was resisting arrest for drug possession. The stranger's dark eyes flicked to Dorothy's car, noting that there were no drugs visible anywhere, no evidence bags, no signs of an actual arrest in progress. He pointed this out, then asked why 2 police officers would have a bottle of industrial acid at a routine traffic stop. The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Wendell ordered him to leave immediately, his voice rising with frustration and barely concealed anger. The stranger asked for their names and badge numbers in a tone that made it clear this wasn't really a request, but a command delivered politely. Something in his voice, the absolute certainty of it, made Kyle automatically start to comply before Wendell cut him off with a sharp gesture. Wendell threatened to arrest the stranger, too, said they'd add him to their little lesson tonight. The stranger reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Wendell's hand went to his holstered weapon body, tensing for a draw. Instead of a weapon, the stranger pulled out a leather credentials holder and flipped it open, holding it up so the light from the patrol car illuminated what was inside. Even from several feet away, even in the uncertain light, the rank insignia was clearly visible. Rear Admiral, United States Navy. Wendell's face went slack with shock, his aggressive posture deflating like a punctured balloon. The stranger introduced himself in that same calm voice as Rear Admiral James Whitaker, commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 2. He explained that he was in Clarksville visiting his elderly mother, who still lived over on Jefferson Street, the house where he'd grown up before leaving for the Navy 40 years ago. He'd been having trouble sleeping tonight and decided to take a drive through his old hometown, see how things had changed. Dorothy's mind raced as she heard the name Whitaker. She remembered a family by that name who'd lived 3 streets over from her when she was young, back in the 1960s and 70s. There had been a boy named James, quiet and serious, who everyone said was going places. He'd joined the Navy right out of high school, and she'd never seen him again, though she'd heard through the community grapevine over the years that he'd done well, become an officer, served all over the world. She'd never imagined that boy was now this imposing man standing between her and 2 officers who wanted to destroy her face with acid. Wendell tried desperately to recover from his shock, changing his story on the fly. He claimed they'd been handling a dangerous suspect who had threatened them with violence, that they were simply defending themselves and maintaining control of a volatile situation. Admiral Whitaker's expression didn't change at all as he turned slightly to look at Dorothy, asking her directly in a gentler voice if she had threatened anyone tonight. Dorothy shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "No, sir. She'd just been driving home from work at the hospital." Wendell insisted she'd been combative and erratic, claimed she'd reached for something in her waistband when they approached her vehicle, forcing them to take defensive measures. The Admiral asked a simple question that cut through the lie like a blade. If Dorothy had been so dangerous, so threatening, why wasn't she in handcuffs right now? Why was she standing free while one officer held acid and the other had been restraining her arms? Wendell stammered, trying to formulate an answer that made sense, but nothing came out coherent. The Admiral then asked, why would they have industrial acid at a traffic stop instead of standard police equipment like pepper spray or a taser? Again, no good answer. Wendell, thinking fast, claimed the acid bottle had been there already, that they'd found it in the abandoned warehouse and were securing it as evidence when the situation with Dorothy escalated. The Admiral noted that Kyle had retrieved the bottle from their patrol car trunk based on his earlier observation of their movements, not from the warehouse. The lie collapsed. Kyle was visibly sweating now, despite the cool November air, his eyes darting between his partner and the Admiral, clearly calculating his own survival. Wendell changed tactics completely, suddenly becoming overly respectful, calling the Admiral Sir, saying that had obviously been some kind of misunderstanding. He offered to let Dorothy go with just a warning, suggested they could all forget this unfortunate incident ever happened, and go their separate ways. The Admiral asked in that same measured tone what exactly Dorothy was being warned about. What violation had she committed? Wendell couldn't provide a coherent answer, his words stumbling over each other. Then Admiral Whitaker did something that made both officers freeze in place. He pulled out his smartphone, tapped the screen a few times, and played a recording. The audio was crystal clear in the quiet night. Wendell's voice saying he'd start with Dorothy's hand and work his way up to her face. Kyle's voice suggesting they make her call Marcus so he could hear her scream. Wendell's voice explaining that they couldn't touch Marcus directly, but could send him a message through his grandmother. Every word of their threats, their admission of revenge, their sadistic plans, all captured with perfect clarity. The Admiral explained that he'd started recording the moment he saw what was happening from down the street, before he'd even announced his presence. He'd captured everything, every threat, every admission, all of it time-stamped and geotagged by his phone. Wendell's face drained of all color, going from flushed red to pale white in seconds. His hand, still holding the acid bottle, began to shake. Kyle actually took several steps backward, physically distancing himself from his partner, the visible separation between them growing with each passing second. Wendell lunged forward, suddenly reaching desperately for the Admiral's phone, trying to grab it and delete the evidence. Admiral Whitaker sidestepped the clumsy attack with fluid economy of movement, 40 decades of combat training evident in how effortlessly he avoided Wendell's grasping hand. The officer stumbled forward off balance, barely catching himself before falling. His hand moved to his service weapon in anger and desperation. The Admiral's voice dropped to a lethal calm as he warned Wendell that drawing a weapon on a flag officer was a federal offense, punishable by court-martial for military personnel and federal prison for civilians assaulting a senior military commander. He added almost conversationally that he was a Navy SEAL with 6 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, had survived firefights with trained insurgents, and strongly suggested Wendell think very carefully about his next move. Wendell's hand hovered over his weapon, but didn't draw it. Something in the Admiral's eyes, the absolute confidence and controlled danger there, convinced him that pulling that gun would be the last mistake he ever made. Kyle raised both hands in the air, clearly wanting no part of any escalation, his face pale with fear. The Admiral turned his attention to Dorothy, asking her in a kind voice if she was okay, if she needed medical attention. Dorothy said she wasn't hurt physically, but she was shaken, terrified, her whole body trembling with delayed shock. The Admiral told her she was free to go, that she could get in her car and drive home safely. He offered to follow her to make sure she arrived without any further problems. Wendell tried one final time, his voice taking on a threatening edge, as he said the Clarksville Police Department would make life hell for anyone who caused trouble for its officers, that the Admiral didn't understand how things worked in this town. Admiral Whitaker mentioned Police Chief Raymond Polk by name, saying he knew Raymond quite well, actually. They'd served together in Fallujah, Iraq back in 2004, during some of the heaviest urban combat of the war. Raymond had been a Marine sergeant, the Admiral a SEAL lieutenant. Their units had coordinated operations in the city. During one particularly intense firefight, Raymond's squad had been pinned down by insurgent machine gun fire, and the Admiral's SEAL team had fought their way through to extract them. Later that same day, Raymond had pulled the Admiral out of a building seconds before an RPG hit it. They'd saved each other's lives, earned each other's eternal loyalty. Raymond had been awarded a Bronze Star for valor that day. Wendell clearly hadn't known any of this, hadn't realized the Admiral had deep connections to Clarksville's police chief. His last avenue of intimidation crumbled. The Admiral said he'd be calling Raymond tonight, sending him the recording, requesting a full investigation. He also mentioned Special Agent Victoria Chen in the FBI field office in Jackson, explaining that Victoria had been investigating civil rights violations in rural Mississippi counties for the past 18 months as part of a federal task force. The Admiral golfed with Victoria's father, a retired federal judge who'd served on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. He was quite certain that Victoria would be very interested in this recording of two police officers attempting to assault an elderly woman with acid as retaliation for her grandson's constitutionally protected speech. Wendell tried desperately to recover from his shock, changing his story on the fly. He claimed they'd been handling a dangerous suspect who had threatened them with violence, that they were simply defending themselves and maintaining control of a volatile situation. Admiral Whitaker's expression didn't change at all as he turned slightly to look at Dorothy, asking her directly in a gentler voice if she had threatened anyone tonight. Dorothy shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "No, sir. She'd just been driving home from work at the hospital. Wendell insisted she'd been combating